Hey Scotts Hill students, hey middle schoolers, high schoolers, anybody else who's out there tuning in. I hope you guys are staying safe and staying smart, staying healthy. And if you're watching this, you're off to a good start. Things are going well for you because you're tuning in as we continue our In Focus series. And in this series, we've been taking a look at how we can keep our faith in focus when we get overwhelmed by our emotions. And as most of you know, we've been walking through the book of Job, and we've been taking a look at how Job's faith was tested by some really tough circumstances. And we've been making sure to look at how Job processed emotions in light of his faith. So let's go ahead and rewind and review Job's experiences. In chapter 1, we learned that Job was a rich man who had a huge family and a strong faith in God. And Satan wanted to prove to God that Job's faith was only there, that Job only had faith in God because God blessed him, because he had good things in this life. So God allowed Satan to test Job's faith by taking away his earthly blessings. So Job, he lost his wealth, which means he lost his land, which means he lost his animals, which means he lost his servants. And then Satan continues to test Job by causing him to lose his family. He lost all of his children. And then we even see in the next chapter that Job loses his health. He's stricken with illnesses that are painful and hard to handle. And that's where we pick up today with Job in the pit, struggling, devastated, and his friends enter the picture to try to give him some advice. The struggle was real for Job in this time. Hashtag I hate my life right now. And his three best friends hear about this and decide to come visit him. So Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, aka EPZ, Papa B, and Z Money, his three best friends come to visit him to bring him some encouragement. I want you to take a moment right now and think of who are your three best friends who give you advice when you're struggling. I'll wait. And so his three best friends roll up and they find Job sitting in the dirt, sitting in the ash pile of his former life, and he is devastated. And you know what he does? He starts complaining. Because that's what we do when life is tough, when our emotions are overwhelming. We complain to our friends. You do it, I do it, we all do it. And that's exactly what Job did. So let's take a few minutes to dive into God's Word and see what it teaches us about the advice of our friends when our emotions are overwhelming. All right, so in the first few chapters of Job, we see that his life has been flipped upside down and that he is struggling and that he is deep in his feels because life is rough for him right now. He's complaining to his friends, and he feels like he has the right to complain. In fact, that's exactly what he says in chapter 6, verse 5. Listen to this. Don't I have a right to complain? With all the things that have happened to me, with all the things that God has done to me, with all the things that have been taken away from my life, don't I have the right to complain, is what Job says. And his friends who have been listening to him complain, after sitting silent for a while, they decide to analyze the situation and to come up with some explanations. But what Job's friends failed to remember and failed to realize is the truth that we shouldn't try to explain God, but instead we should try to help people explore him. Because most of the time, these outside influences, your friends and the world around you and social media, they try to focus on having you understand God's plans, when what we need in emotional times is not a better understanding of God's plans as much as a greater trust in his plans. And how real is that for you right now? How real is that for us right now? With the COVID-19 coronavirus hitting us with unexpected, unanswered questions, canceled plans, anxiety, confusion, and fear. And I'm sure that you've got yourself a healthy dose of uneasy emotion because of all the things that are going on in the world around you right now. And in times like this, your emotion is screaming to you. If you just understood why this is happening, then you could feel better. And I'm sure your friends and the influences you have in your life are trying their best to make you feel better, because a lot of times that's what friends do. But the truth is, we don't need friends who will only try to make us feel better. We need friends who will try to make our faith stronger. I'll say that again. We don't need friends who will only try to make us feel better. We need friends who will try to make our faith stronger. So let's put Job's friends up to the test. Let's see how they do at this. Do they try to make him feel better, or they try to make his faith stronger? Let's check it out. We'll start with Eliphaz, E-P-Z. He's the first to respond to Job, and his whole message to Job can kind of be wrapped up in chapter 4, verse 8. This is what he says. Listen, my experience shows that those who plant trouble and cultivate evil will harvest the same. So essentially what he's telling Job is, he goes, you reap what you sow. You had it coming. You did something evil, something sinful, and now you're paying for it. Whew, kind of harsh, right? Well, and he continues to even say in chapter 5, verse 17, he says that God is punishing him, that God is disciplining him, correcting him, then he needs to accept it. He says, do not despise the discipline of the Almighty when you sin. Not exactly the most loving advice right off the bat. Well, in comes Bildad. We got Papa B coming in, and he doesn't make it any better. He says essentially, if you're good, God will bless you. Look at what he says in Job 8:6. If you are pure and live with integrity, he will surely rise up and restore your happy home. He says, if you live right, God will bless you. So you must not be living right. If you live right, God will bless you. And that's what you need to do. He says, Job, be better. That's some bad advice. Anybody ever get that advice? That's hard to hear. Just be better. That's not really helpful. And then in comes Zophar to put the cherry on top. He says in chapter 11, verse 6, this is what he says. Listen, God is doubtless punishing you far less than you deserve. Wow. He says, stop being a baby. You deserve worse. I mean, come on, Job's friends, they're savages. They're savages. And so what we see here, as Job's friends try to explain God to him, they actually put him in a box. They limit his character to just one area because they focus so much on his justice. They say, listen, Job, God is a just God. So if you're experiencing pain and suffering and bad things are happening to you, it's because you deserve it. God gives you what you deserve. You get what you deserve in this life. You sinned against God. You must have done something wrong. You must have done something evil. And that's why your life is difficult. And while God is a just God, that limits the full picture and doesn't actually give us a full explanation of what is happening. But they get to this conclusion. They land here based on their life experience. You know, it's kind of like that friend of yours who's a know-it-all. You know the one I'm talking about. That person who has the answers for everything. Yeah, kind of annoying, right? Don't be that friend. Don't be that friend who knows it all. Remember that God is bigger than you can imagine, that his ways are higher than yours, and that this world cannot be explained, especially not by you. Sorry, it's just the truth. But Job's friends, they think they've got it all figured out. In fact, listen to what they say in chapter 5, verse 27. We have studied life and found all this to be true. Wow, they have studied life. That's their explanation. They've studied life. Well, here's a different perspective I want you guys to hear today. When you study this life, you can get lost. But when you study God's word, you'll find wisdom. You're going to want to remember that. When you study this life, you might get lost. But when you study God's word, you'll always find wisdom. And we see that Job's friends missed the point and they ended up giving some bad advice to their friend. I'm sure you can relate. I mean, we've all gotten bad advice from our friends, right? Man, you should definitely dye your hair orange. Yeah, you're going to want to play hard to get. That'll really make him like you more. Or even, hey, I dare you to jump off that roof. I mean, we get some bad advice from our friends. Let's be real. And when your emotions are overwhelming and when you're all in your feels, friends, they end up most of the time just trying to make you feel better. They try to make you feel better even if it means giving some bad advice. And if their goal is to just make you feel better, they end up missing the opportunity to make your faith stronger. And it's especially hard when our emotions are overwhelming and we're all in our feels. See, because then our friends, they just try to make us feel better. They just try to make us feel better, even if it means giving some bad advice. And if their goal is to make you feel better, they might miss making your faith stronger. They might miss what God really wants, and that's for us to grow closer to Him with a stronger faith. And that's what happened with Job's friends. Because they were so focused on Job's circumstance, they were so focused on what had happened to Job, that they lost focus on the fullness of God's character. They only talked about God being just, that He was this holy and righteous judge. And they missed completely, they left out the truth that God is also loving. God is also merciful. God is also forgiving. God is also kind. God is also compassionate. And He's faithful. And He's good. See, God is so much bigger than just one area of His character. And when we struggle with our circumstances, our emotions, they tend to shrink our view of God's character and the fullness of it. We forget about the fullness of His character when we're struggling in our circumstances. That's what happened to Job. But I want you to remember this. I want you to realize this today, that circumstances don't define faith. God's character does. Your circumstances don't define your faith. God's character does. And so when friends try to explain God instead of helping you explore Him, they make God seem pretty small. I mean, think about it this way. If you could completely explain all that God is and fully understand why He does all the things that He does, He'd be a pretty unimpressive God, right? We should be glad that we can't wrap our head around Him, because it means that He's that much higher than us and He's that great and that awesome, that He truly is God, because we can't fully understand Him. And so when Job's friends tried to explain Him, they didn't really help Job much. And then when they tried to encourage him by telling him that he would get all these things from God, that God would bless him if he just would do the things God wanted, they turned God into a genie, and that's not good either. Because faith doesn't come from what God will give us. Faith comes from what God already gave us. And I think you know where I'm going with this. Jesus. That's right. God has given us Jesus, His one and only Son, so that we could be saved. And our faith in Him is our foundation. And that's what we need most in times of emotional struggle. When these circumstances of life are difficult, we need Jesus the most. And so I want to encourage you in this time, make sure that you're turning to Jesus, and make sure you have influences in your life that point you back to Jesus. Because what's amazing about friends who will try to make your faith stronger is that they will also make you feel better. You hear that? It's a win-win. And let me explain. It's not going to maybe happen right away. But if their goal is to make your faith stronger, if their goal is to push you closer to God, if you end up with a stronger faith, you will always end up feeling better. It may take a little bit of time, but you will always end up feeling better. And here's why. Because our God is the source of peace. Because our God is the source of joy. Because our God's grace for you is enough. And so when you got the right people in your life who don't stir the pot, but instead stir up faith, and when you get peace and joy and grace, let me tell you, when you rest in those things, you will feel better. Listen, the greatest blessing in this life isn't feeling good. The greatest blessing in this life is knowing God. So I got to ask you, do your friends help widen your view of God based on the wisdom of the Bible? Or do they narrow your focus and blind you to the fullness of His character? Do they point you to the truth of 1 Peter 5:7 that can be a huge encouragement in times like these as we experience the difficulties of the coronavirus and the quarantine and the social distancing, and remind you to give all your worries and cares to God, for He cares about you? Do they point you to that truth, or do they just tell you what you want to hear so that you'll stop complaining? Because in the end, we all need friends who will help make our faith stronger instead of just trying to make us feel better. Get you some friends like that. And hopefully you've got friends like that in your small group here at church. And what we want you to do is go ahead and connect with them. And if you can't connect with them, make sure that you connect with your family and let them be the ones that'll help stir up your faith. And so what I want you to do right now, after you finish watching this video, is go ahead and get online, connect with your small group over FaceTime, over Jitsi, the Bible app, Facebook, or Instagram, and go through the discussion guide that we've sent. And if you don't have it already, you can click the link below and download it right now, because we are better together when we help each other explore God through His Word. Well, that's all that we have for you today, students, but stay tuned for so much more content that's going to be coming your way. Listen, we love you, we miss you, and we're praying for you. We want you to stay safe and stay connected and growing in your faith. We'll see you next time.